And for me, this is kind of an old product love affair because it was the very first product that got launched when I joined the sister clinic to Noble Labs. So SC54 is the grandparent, and Terrasol Salmonella TC is the next generation. I'm going to talk about the cost and importance of Salmonella in the production of pork, and just a very brief overview of that. The scope of the problem in pigs, it's the Salmonella enterica group, and there are 6 or 7 big groups of Salmonella, but enterica is the one that we worry about as mammals, especially. Before 1995, if you look at the survey work, it was mainly cholera suis in pigs. After 1995 to today, the typhimuriums have really expanded. Whether that's changes in production, we'd love to think that it's the use of the cholera suis vaccines really suppress them, but it's kind of like enteritis in poultry. As you change things in the system, different serovars evolve and adapt, take advantage of that scenario. And that data comes from Iowa State University. So there's some very recent data from there. In people, both the USDA and the CDC published annual reports of what's going on with salmonellas. Dr. Gay Miller from Illinois did some survey work a few years ago. Typhimurium is the number 1 public health serovar. That's the one that's most important in the Salmonella family. And it's even more important than Campylobacter, which I was kind of surprising. And it's estimated there are more than 100,000 human cases annually, about 11% of the total foodborne cases from CDC's enteric disease survey. And unfortunately, it's about 35% of the hospitalizations. So some of these other foodborne pathogens maybe aren't as aggressive. They're more common, but maybe not as aggressive as typhimurium can be. And it's also responsible for about 28% of the deaths. Pre-harvest risks for Salmonella in pork. On-farm risk factors, you can see the references there. In pigs, it's really an adult animal that has it, that can shed it to its piglet, so sow to piglet. At or around weaning is a common method. Split marketing, changing the social structure of the groups, movement of animals from one site to another, all of those things induce stress, and that's where you get not really recrudescence, but shedding of that organism from the feces, and the other pigs pick it up. Sorry to talk about that during supper time. Feed is a common source of Salmonella, not necessarily typhimurium, but these other types that can come in and cause a problem via contamination of ingredients or cross-contamination at the plant, and a contaminated transport, and in the feeder as well. And finally, facilities, obviously continuous production. We don't have too many of those anymore. But if they're not cleaned properly, Salmonella can survive in the environment. Rodents in the facility, etc., can all lead to that as a problem, as well as us and other fomites, just carrying it physically from one place to another. At the plant, there are also risks. If it's in a pen at the plant, if they don't necessarily clean things up as well as they can. Matt Erdman, when he was at Iowa State, looked at rapid extraintestinal dissemination. And what that really means is if a pig comes into a plant and it's rooting around in a dirty lairage pen and it picks that bug up, within 3 hours that's into the pig and it's throughout the body. Clinically, you might not see it. They might not get sick, but they can pick it up and it gets in those lymph nodes and around the body of the pig. That's important, obviously, at the plant, but contaminated trucks. If you've got a truck taking pigs to the plant that's not been cleaned properly, holding pens there, etc. Direct contamination. Scott Hurd, the late Scott Hurd, talked about health in the pig itself is a risk point, and he looked at pleural lesions in the pig. So the more pleural lesions or pull-outs in the pig at the plant, every 1% of those, I think, corresponded to 5% more contaminated carcasses. So as you're pulling those things out, going down the plant line, if they stick, they tear, contamination happens, and it gets carried from one animal to the next. So just general herd health, improving that will have a food safety benefit by reducing these lesions. Indirect contamination, once a knife or a saw or other equipment gets dirty. And the measures we look at, we're kind of seeing the beef industry, I think, potentially at risk might be the wrong word, but likely to start looking at lymph nodes at the packing plant rather than the surface of the carcass. Today with pigs, we swab the carcass at 3 different points in the cooler, and we're just looking for surface contamination, the jowl, the midline, and by the tail head. And the plants themselves are really good at not having that problem. They take care of the knives, they take care of the peel-outs, how they handle those, etc. So it's only less than 1% of the carcasses are positive by culture. The challenge is the lymph node, or ground pork, and that's a much higher prevalence rate. That pig, when it comes to the plant and it picks that salmonella up and it goes all around the body, that hangs up in the lymph nodes. So when those get tossed into the grinder, that then can cross-contaminate other pork in the grinder, and now all of a sudden, instead of 1% of the carcasses that are positive, 15, 20, 25% of the lymph nodes or ground pork, minced pork, then can be contaminated in that fashion. So that'll be a very different measure if and when we get to that. What I've seen published is the beef guys may have that challenge first. But I would expect that whatever happens there will come down the stream. Economically, Jim Klebenstein, and I'm going to draw a blank, Greg, on the actual grad student that did the analysis. But anyway, we'll get you the paper if you want it. High salmonella exposure level 3 versus level 1. They looked at it pounds of square feet in the facility, so about 5 pounds fewer square feet, or pork per square foot per year. Multiply that out, 35, about 35 pounds, 10 to 15 pounds per carcass less pork produced per year in a really highly exposed environment. Less impact if it's a little cleaner. The challenge for us has been, we've done a lot of studies with the vaccine and shown we can make a distinct impact on the food safety level, but unfortunately the cost of doing the food safety things so far is about the same as the benefit. So nobody's going to jump out and make a big change on a food safety impact. It's got to be productivity based. High seroprevalence sites, Dave Baum did this. He looked at those in a commercial production system. Similar response, less pork produced through the facility per year. Conventional control methods, things like heavy metals, zinc in the feed for salmonella, copper as a growth promoter, etc. Those things have some benefits, but they also have risks in that they might select for antimicrobial resistance. There are a couple of newer papers out there that those things have a benefit, and they're not an antimicrobial themselves, but they might lead to selection for resistance, whether the same genetic packages have those resistance to both of those. And unfortunately, Typhimurium and Heidelberg, which are two of those that are important for pigs, are especially susceptible. We all know about antimicrobials and how FDA is changing their analysis and risk assessment for antimicrobial resistance. Resistance genes can be transferred via feed. So if you've got an organism in the feed that maybe isn't important for us or to the pig, but it has that resistance gene, it gets plunked into the barn, and now all of a sudden that gene can get transferred to other organisms that are important. And environmental organisms, there's a little bit of work being done there that whether it's municipal waste, animal waste, etc., that's being spread in the environment, that can also select for resistance in the normal flora that's out in the environment. It makes sense, right? These things have been around for 40,000 years. In some cave in France, antimicrobial resistance genes were found, and it's Mother Nature. It's how different bugs survive. The benefits of some alternative control methods, and it's using the SC54 grandparent or mom vaccine. Dave Baum again looked at some work when he was doing his PhD at Iowa State and looked at some of these high prevalence barns, these level 3 barns, and saw about 1/10 of a pound a day improvement in average daily gain when those barns were vaccinated compared to matched controls, contemporary timing, and about 2/10 of an improvement in feed to gain advantage as well. And then I myself kind of repeated some of that work in a different production system. That was a before and after, as well as a side-by-side. Similar findings. So if you can reduce the impact of salmonella clinically, even if it's not cholera suis and really nasty clinical disease, you can still have a production benefit. That will drive, I think, what's going to play the uptake of the vaccine, the production benefit. The food safety part, we're going to see if we can repeat some of the benefits, but that may be more as a preparation for what happens, or preventing something. And as Marcos Restaño from USDA pointed out, vaccine should play a role. Enhanced control with the vaccine, it's consistent. You can put it in, no matter what happens to the pigs, that immunity is there to help. We know enterosol SC54 can reduce the amount of salmonella in pork at slaughter, and we think enterosol salmonella TC should be nothing but better.